They've stood at the front lines of law, leadership, and public service. Attorney Karen Jimeno, sharp, steady, a lawyer, and educator, turns complex issues into clear insight. Attorney Mike Toledo, seasoned, fearless, a strategist and communicator whose voice has shaped public understanding of law and governance. Together, they make the law accessible, connecting principles with real-life questions, confronting the issues that define our nation. This is Abogado.
Good evening, welcome to Abogado, where the country's biggest legal battles collide with the toughest questions facing every Filipino. I'm Attorney Mike Toledo.
And I'm Attorney Karen Jimeno. Tonight, we look back at the debates that ignited timelines, split public opinion, and pushed legal discourse into the national spotlight. These weren't just conversations. They were clashes of principles, values, and visions for the Philippines.
From family and relationships to crime and accountability, from free speech to government aid, and all the way to citizens demanding more direct power, these topics define 2025 and force us to confront what kind of nation we want to be.
Tonight, we bring you not just highlights, but the debates that moved, divided, and awakened the Philippine public. We opened the year with one of the country's most emotionally charged and historically unresolved questions. Should divorce finally be legalized in the Philippines? This issue forces us to confront not only constitutional text, but the lived realities of couples trapped in broken marriages, balancing protection of the family with the state's duty to safeguard the welfare of its citizens.
And this debate captured that divide clearly. Former Ombudsman Justice Conchita Carpio Morales argued that absolute divorce is a necessary remedy to address the suffering caused by irreparable unions. Meanwhile, Attorney J.P. Calleja insisted that divorce violates the Constitution's mandate to protect marriage as an inviolable social institution. What followed was one of our season's most intense and principled exchanges, passionate, deeply human, and rooted in competing interpretations of the Constitution.
All right. As I have earlier stated in a public discussion, I am for absolute divorce. To me, absolute divorce is the solution to the societal problems attendant to dysfunctional marriages and dysfunctional families that result from it. Thus, it's the state's obligation to carry out its mandate to protect the welfare of the people by legislating a law on absolute divorce. And it breaks my heart to know that some legislators are not for absolute divorce, despite the fact that we know for a fact that some are infidel and therefore are not true to their opposition against absolute divorce.
Divorce should not be legalized because it is against the Constitution. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Tonight's discussion is not just about the benefits, the practicality, or the necessity of having an absolute divorce law. But more importantly, as lawyers, as members of the legal community, the first question that we must answer is, does an absolute divorce bill violate the Constitution? And the answer to that question is yes. Article 2, Section 15 of the Constitution provides that marriage as an inviolable social institution is the foundation of the family and shall be protected by the state. No other than the people themselves, the members of the Constitutional Convention that ratified the 1987 Constitution, made that protection in order to safeguard the sanctity of marriage as an institution.
Marriage is, as they say, an inviolable social institution and the foundation of the family, which the state is duty-bound to protect. But the state is supposed to be aware that this inviolable constitution is founded on the concept that a marriage is blissful, is happy, and is in harmony with your wife, with your husband, with your children, and with the community in which you live in. Unfortunately, this is not the case in some, if not most, cases of marital discords. You see, the Constitution, while it says that it is that family is or marriage is supposed to be an inviolable constitution, it is mandated also to protect the welfare of the people. First, let's interpret a particular provision of the Constitution, set it apart from the rest of the provisions. When we construe a certain provision, we should consider the other provisions of the Constitution, so that there will be harmony, so that there will be no inconsistency, so that there should be no discord. Thus, we should not construe a constitutional provision in its literal sense, but it should be construed in a sense, in a modified sense, so that we can harmonize the entire provisions of the Constitution.
The court, speaking through the wisdom of Justice Morales, said that the first rule in constitutional construction is actually verba legis, or the plain meaning rule. And the second is ratio est anima. Only when there is ambiguity should constitutional construction resort to the soul or the interpretation. And the last method is the Constitution should be interpreted as a whole. Now, if we go back to the wording of Section 2, Article 15 of the Constitution, marriage as an inviolable social institution is the foundation of the family and shall be protected by the state. The first method of constitutional construction should be used, and that is verba legis, or the plain meaning rule. So although I agree that one of the methods of constitutional construction is ut magis valeat quam pereat, which is the Constitution should be interpreted as a whole, the jurisprudence right now is that, first of all, we must do so using the verba legis, or the plain meaning rule. Thank you.
The potential legal effects of divorce is that, you give financial stability to the offending spouse, because the offender, to the offended spouse, because the offending spouse may have neglected his or her responsibility to his spouse, to their children, and to others who are mandated to be cared for by the couple. Again, financial and custody matters will be settled. Such settlement is one of the legal effects of the grant of divorce. Then also, of course, the division of conjugal property would be settled, the payment of debts incurred during the marriage, as well as the use of the name, marital or maiden name, of the wife, if in case the wife is the offended spouse. Now, you were asking for social effects also of marriage, is that you would free the offended couple, the offended wife, from the pain, the anger, the hostility, the depression attendant to the irreparable marriage that offended spouse is going through. And of course, it takes time before probably the divorce effects will be felt, but given the resilience of the Filipinos, it will come a time when you will be able to absorb the social effects of divorce.
The arguments of Justice Carpio Morales focused on the benefits on the spouse. But let's go back to the definition of marriage. It is the foundation of the family precisely because the children are also at stake. The future of the children are also at stake. And therefore, marriage is not only about spouses. It's not only about freeing one spouse from the bondage of marriage, but it's also about the future of the children. And to borrow Dean Jamoy Gatdula's words in his article, millennials seem to be afraid of commitment nowadays precisely because of divorce. So there's a study that links this culture among millennials of seemingly afraid of commitment because of divorce, because they can cancel out anyway. They can go back to their original status as single individuals. And so no one wants to commit. No one wants to have a lifelong commitment. and that is marriage. So what we have is a society that is whose members are afraid to commit, whose members are afraid to be hurt, whose members are afraid to be frustrated. And that is the kind of culture that divorce will promote if this divorce bill will be passed. So marriage is an inviolable social institution. It is the foundation of the family, because the reason for that is we want to build a strong society, a society whose members are not afraid to surrender against all odds. We have laws to address the present problems in marriages. I have been listening to the arguments of the good justice, and so far the arguments are more couple-centered. So how about good arguments for divorce that are also children-centered?
To begin with, divorce would, in the first place, affect the couples. The effect on the children would come later if divorce is granted. Now, even children now who see their parents who are in the verge of quarreling almost every day are even the ones who advise their parents, why don't they just separate? Why don't they just ask for divorce? They are aware of the father who is philandering and neglects to carry out his responsibilities. So the children themselves are the ones who are asking their parents to secure divorce. So why do you say that the children would not be considered in the first place when you talk of divorce?
I admit that there are some instances wherein the children would be the one to suggest that their parents should have divorce. But these are children. These are 18 years old and below 18 years old. So firstly, they really don't know what views they are espousing. But more than that, I've handled several cases of broken marriages, and it's so unfair for children to choose which side they should be. For example, if the mother and father are quarreling and they are separating, much more if they are going to have divorce, and a daughter or a son will choose which side should he or she go to. That's very difficult, and it's so unfair for children. And it's even traumatic because there will be, of course, if children are in school and there are some family events, it's so unfair for children to be seeing their classmates with parents, and they are alone in school.
Mm-hmm. Any other question, Ombudsman Justice?
Well, if you factor in the feelings of children who are the children of prospective divorcees, we will never, ever, under any circumstance in the Philippines, consider the grant of divorce. I still maintain that absolute divorce should be granted because given the sufferings of mostly battered wives, because there are a few instances also battered husbands, how can we extricate them from the world of pain, from the world of agony, from the world of distress, if we allow them to continuously suffer and be living in misery, despite the fact that they could have other recourses, including divorce to be granted by the courts. Of course, divorce can only be granted by the courts. But to say that it is not in conformity with the constitutional provision that marriage is an inviolable social institution is, to me, unacceptable. Because, as I said, we should also consider harmonizing all the provisions of the Constitution and not taking one part or segregating one part alone and interpreting it without consideration of the other provisions as a whole.
It is important that the risks far outweigh the benefits of absolute divorce, as it should be emphasized that despite all of the sensationalized claim of escaping from alleged violent relationships and marriages, majority of Filipinos would choose to preserve the family above all else. And such importance is emphasized in Article 15 of the Constitution, Section 2 of the Constitution. We are against the present divorce bill because it espouses or cheapens marriage by allowing summary procedure.
Justice Carpio Morales emphasized the legal and social relief that divorce could provide, financial stability, custody clarity, and freedom from abusive or traumatic marriages. Attorney Calleja countered with the constitutional guardrails that marriage is protected precisely to preserve the family and safeguard the future of children.
And our audience felt the tension, some resonating with Justice Morales' call for compassion for spouses suffering in irreparable unions, while others sided with Attorney Calleja's reminder that the Constitution places marriage at the core of family and society. As we learned, this issue is not just legal, it is personal, painful, and deeply intertwined with who we are as a nation.
You know, partner, ito talaga sa mga debates that we handled, the episodes of Abogado. This one was one of the most emotional, so to speak. So, ano sa tingin mo? Ano ba talaga dapat? Payagan na ba natin ang divorce dito sa Pilipinas?
Well, you know what's interesting, partner, is that the President, just this week, had his list of priority bills that he called on Congress to pass as soon as possible.
Correct.
And pag tinignan mo, wala doon yung divorce bill. And I'm sure for a lot of people that have been calling for the passage of this type of law, siguro iniisip nila, bakit hindi ito kasama sa mga priority, no? But I think for me, this was really a memorable debate because we have no less than Justice Carpio Morales, a former Justice of the Supreme Court, and former ombudsman, arguing for divorce law.
Yes,
and a lot of people thought that she was more of a conservative type of justice. But I think she does raise good points that are you going to let people who are trapped in broken marriages just stay there? And if you think of the children, that it might be more damaging to the children to have parents that have a broken relationship raising them.
Correct. And while we all agree with the constitutional mandate, pati na rin sa family code, that marriage is not just a mere contract but an inviolable social institution, but at a certain point, di ba, partner, at a certain point, the state should already back off. If they really tried hard to make sure that their marriage worked, but it just could not work, I think the state should already say, go on, move on with your lives. Because at the end of the day, nakikita naman natin din sa ating saligang batas, di ba, the pursuit of happiness is also very important.
And ang hindi ko makakalimutan, partner, in our episode as well, was your suggestion na bakit hindi subukan na gawin ang contract, since it's a contract, it's a marriage contract with an expiration date, at bahala na mag-agree yung parties kung i-renew ba or hindi. Well, I know that's a joke, but it's still something that is memorable, partner.
Yeah, that's true. I'm glad you remember that.
And then on that note, do you think uusad itong divorce bill sa, alam ko may na-file na talaga, but do you think it will move forward in the 20th Congress? Will it make any progress? Well,
in my view, before it started, medyo hindi, parang hindi pa ready yung taong bayan, no? Hindi pa ready yung ating mga kababayan. But now, I think as we move on, as time move on, the closer it is to the possibility of having it pass, and parang nagiging acceptable na sa lahat. Of course, hindi naman natin alam, I think we all know the stand of the church on this matter, but we have to remember this. Dalawa na lang po natitira dito sa buong mundo na mga state na hindi rin recognize ang divorce. Isa na po yan ang Vatican at ang pangalawa po ang Pilipinas. Kaya siguro maybe it's about time that we really seriously consider passing a divorce law. Now,
well, that remains to be seen. No? Tignan natin what happens.
That's true. And now, partner, no, if the divorce debate was emotional, as you mentioned, the next one was quite seismic. Same-sex marriage forces the country to confront its deepest legal and moral fault lines. What the Constitution protects, what culture permits, and whose relationships the law recognizes. This issue demands a clear reckoning with both human dignity and constitutional language.
And our guest did exactly that. Attorney Darwin Angeles argued that marriage is a fundamental right rooted in human dignity, one that the Constitution does not limit to heterosexual couples. Attorney Maria Luz Arzaga Mendoza countered with the force of tradition, religion, and existing law, asserting that marriage is a divine design between a man and a woman. Their clash over morality, secularism, equal protection, and the very meaning of family became one of the most intense and defining debates of the season.
So in my opinion, same-sex marriage should be legalized. The fact that it is not allowed right now under a system of laws is unconstitutional. Why is that? Because the Philippine Supreme Court in Republic versus Marilyn Manalo already ruled that marriage is a fundamental right of every human being. That said, that means every person, by virtue of one's inherent humanity and human dignity, has the right to marry the person of his or her choice. And if that person that they choose so happens to be of the same sex, then I think it is a right that should be given to them. To deny them of that right is to deny them of their inherent human dignity. So that is my position.
I do not agree on approving on same-sex marriage, considering that same-sex marriage, of course, does not actually exist in our country. Not only based on our law, but the cultural and the religious underpinning. Every law always assumes a certain kind of morality. And when you speak of morality, you speak about what's good and what is bad. So right off the bat, there is a divine design for the creation of a man and woman. And if you speak morality, you speak about the standard of God. And God does not approve or uphold same-sex marriage. And so the law must not be codified nor prepared for it. Marriage is a very sacred institution. It's an inviolable social institution, and it is a divine design between a man and a woman. In fact, the enabling law of the Republic of the Philippines states so in the family law, although there are eyebrows raised that the Constitution does not prohibit. Well, I say it does not grant either. So if you, in conjunction, take the Constitution provision vis-a-vis the enabling law, absolutely, it does not allow so. Secondly, again, as I previously mentioned, every law assumes a certain kind of morality. And specifically here in the country, in our country, of course, you are not compelled to adopt anything, but it is from the get-go, our country is founded on Christianity. And the culture, we may not be that so liberated, but of course that's of no moment. Fact of the matter is the framers of our Constitution, if you will remember the preamble, we the sovereign people invoke the Almighty God. He's the source of such morality, good and bad. And the design between a man and a woman is such. And digressing from such design is definitely a corruption of God's design.
Right. One view of looking at law and its source of authority is what you said, morality. That derives from the natural law school, yes. But we must also be cognizant that the Constitution also ordains separation of church and state, which means that by design, our system of laws is secular as opposed to ecclesiastical. We are not proposing that the church change its views. In fact, I even assert that the church is supreme in its own dimension. And the Catholic Church can, of course, have its own doctrine as to how it views its marriage. But our law on marriage is a secular institution, even though it's also provided for under the Constitution. And as you have said, the Constitution does not prohibit same-sex marriage. In fact, it is only the law that contains the stipulation that marriage is between a man and a woman. That being said, and law being a secular institution like Congress is at liberty or has the power to actually change it if the society so demands. And on that point, I jump off that another source of legal vitality is the will of society, which means that if society is ready to recognize and grant rights to a distinct minority, an act that has been done by our government to recognize rights to several other minorities, the people with disabilities, indigenous peoples, senior citizens, and the like. The law can be changed by Congress. And I also remember that you mentioned the preamble of the Constitution. After the preamble mentions the Almighty, the preamble goes on to say that the wish of the sovereign Filipino people is to build a just and humane society. And I think that's where I will focus.
You came here with such information and postures. Where did you derive your authority?
Well, I derive my authority based on how I've been brought up, my upbringing, my own personal faith as well. So you've mentioned the influence of religion. I was brought up a Catholic myself. And even the Catholic Church has been more open. Of course, they haven't changed their views on same-sex marriage yet. But right now, I mean, it's public news that we had Pope Francis recently, unfortunately, pass away. But he was one of the most liberal popes who spoke favorably about the rights of the members of the LGBTQ community. And I think that is a positive sign of that societal movement towards openness and acceptance. And I think I might have, if I may return a question to you.
I may, if you
yes,
would.
yes, go ahead.
I like your statement. So your authority is the culture and your religion. And
Yes.
absolutely you believe in God.
Of course.
And the Word of God is the Bible, which says and opposes same-sex marriage.
From a certain perspective, I'd say that. But I come from the catechism and the theology that our God is a loving God.
True.
Who treasures expressions of love. In fact, Jesus Christ said that his only commandment is to love one another as I have loved you, right? And that is a gender-neutral expression of love. And that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, very well. Likewise, He is, I agree with you, a loving God. He is likewise a just God who punishes. Punishes what?
Yes.
Sin. And this is a sin. We are in a country that is, it's not Russia. It is a democratic country. You can do whatever you want to do. But again, as I said, I am not into the position of same-sex marriage. Civil union, well, there's partnership and of course all the prevailing relationships as well as rights can be legislated, but not that marriage.
Yes, that's a very good point. I would like to agree, but I come from the perspective that in order to really breathe life to the ideal of granting equal protection under the law to everyone, we have to uniform or to apply uniformly labels. And yes, marriage may be a play in semantics. You can call a civil union and give it all of the trappings of a valid marriage, but call it a civil union. The thing is, marriage has a cultural significance to it, a societal significance to it, such that if you create another institution for the minority, the LGBTQ community, you are condemning them to become the other. They are different from us. And in a way, that by itself is already a form of discrimination that, in my opinion, is not germane to the purposes of the law, because their only difference from myself, who happens to be a heterosexual, is their gender preference. We might be aligned in all other things, and I do not think that's a reason to deny them of that secular institution of marriage. In a democracy, majority rules. And the rules are laid down by the Constitution and enacted by laws. The LGBTQ community, being a minority, lies an inherent disadvantage because their interests are not aligned with that of the majority. But I think the majoritarian nature of democracy is not an absolute bar in enacting a law that favors or accommodates minorities such as the LGBTQ community. We have laws to that effect already, which I have mentioned earlier. And the LGBTQ community is entitled to equal protection by the state because it is one of the most vibrant, active communities in the world and a very important pillar of national prosperity. They are among our most talented citizens. So our commitment to democracy requires that for these people, let us give them equal protection of the law. Our Constitution ordains that government shall build a just and humane society and a regime of rule of law that must include equality as a cornerstone. So for me, national posterity, even the moral fiber of our nation will be built and strengthened if we encourage everybody to assume the voluntary obligations of marriage, to channel together common resources and build a family, which is an important foundation of our Philippine democracy. Thank you.
The fabric of the Constitution, founded on having a family, is between a wife and a husband, or a man and a woman, to create a family. Such creation of a family recognizes procreation. The universal, as well as the humanity's DNA or genetics, is of course always focused on a man and a woman. That's the society. That's the place where we're at. And the uniformity of the application of the laws does not exist at all on different kinds of persons or things. Henceforth, meaning equality is for equals. A man and a woman for marriage is totally distinct and different from each other. And the Constitution, as well as the enabling law, uphold, and I do uphold, the divine creation of a family created by God. Yes.
This episode sparked huge conversations online, especially among LGBTQIA+ Filipinos who saw their rights debated head-on. Attorney Angeles framed marriage as a secular constitutional right tied to equality and a just and humane society, while Attorney Arzaga Mendoza defended marriage as a sacred, culturally rooted institution grounded in both the family code and religious morality.
And that contrast revealed the core tension our country is wrestling with. Should marriage law follow secular constitutional principles, or should it continue reflecting long-standing religious and cultural norms? The debate laid bare how difficult it is for the law to balance those forces and how deeply personal the consequences are for millions of Filipinos whose dignity, identity, and families are at stake.
Okay. Partner, kung yung divorce was a heated argument and very controversial, siguro lalong itong same-sex marriage.
Correct. And I think sa akin lang pananaw, partner, while sa divorce nagkakaroon na ng parang groundswell of support, no? Etong same-sex medyo mainit pa to. Para malayo pa yata sa aking pananaw.
Bakit?
No?
Bakit mo palagay na malayo pa? Do you think Filipinos are ultra-conservative, or morally this is questionable for a lot of Filipinos?
Well, I think while they are aware of what's going on around the world, that in some other countries they already allow same-sex marriages, I think the innate conservatism of Filipinos and really the influence of the church would really make the passage, in my view, of such law difficult. I'm not saying na hindi mapapasa to eventually in the future. Ang aking lang pananaw, baka for now, medyo maaga pa. So I guess the question is, for those really pushing for the passage of such a law, partner, is to come up with an educational campaign of why it should already be allowed. But then again, sa aking paningins right now, with the church and with the innate conservatism also of most Filipinos, medyo it will take quite some time.
What is your view on the suggestion by other lawmakers na magkaroon na lang muna ng batas that allows for partners, yung mga live-in partners, same-sex partners, to allow family and property rights, meaning yung, the same sense of siguro inheritance and the ability to share na para kayo may conjugal property. Kasi yun naman din yung unfair. Imagine if namuhunan kayo together, you work together as a couple to build your wealth together. Pero kung may mangyari dun sa isa because we don't allow same-sex marriages, then yung magsasucceed or mag-inherit from either one would be, people that probably are not even supportive of their marriage or walang kinalaman sa relationship nila at all, yung mga kapatid or next of kin na wala namang support sa kanila.
Kasi the rules of succession as it is will not entitle the partner to any of these. So kaya nga it's really something na needs to be studied further, because it also touches on the material aspect of life. It's a reality, no? Nasabi natin we don't want to be materialistic, pero let's face it, that's why nga may property rights, kasi you work hard to make a living, and you want to make sure na yung anong kinita mo will also benefit the people you love most, no? Your family and even your extended family, so to speak. Kaya, again, that was another very interesting topic of debate, and both people that argued were quite convincing, if I may say.
And I think what's important of what we do here in Abogado is that people might be split on this issue.
Yes.
And when it comes to legislators pushing for whether to finally pass the divorce bill or same-sex marriage,
Yes.
at least the voters, the people, can have well-informed decisions as well as to what they would want to support. Kasi we have lawyers from both sides arguing for different views.
Correct. And as they say, you can disagree without being disagreeable. Yun po talaga ang purpose ng abogado, yun ang plataforma ng abogado, na ipakita natin the most controversial issues, pakita natin ang punto or the side of one argument versus the side of one argument, and then come up with all the legal arguments and let the people decide. Pero kasi, di ba parte sa ating pananaw, an informed and educated citizenry can be very active partners in nation building. Pero pag hindi po kayo, hindi nyo alam ang mga issues at hindi nyo alam ang mga arguments that accompanies such issues, paano po kayo get involved actively in nation building?
Yeah. But partner, one thing I was thinking about pala, kukunti pa yung members ng Congress then that are in same-sex relationships. So,
Yes.
baka mahirap pa nga na i-push itong batas na to.
Yes.
Whereas, I don't know how many of people in Congress have been annulled or naiintindihan yung concept of failed marriages. So, I mean,
Yes.
if we'll see if the divorce bill will pass in the 20th Congress, but you're right, baka yung same-sex marriage, let's wait and see, pero baka mas matagalan pa ito.
yun.
Well, debates that confronted crime, accountability, and the laws shaping the next generation, from the minimum age of criminal liability to the battle over decriminalizing libel. That's next on Abogado.
Welcome back and thanks for joining us. You're watching Abogado. This next topic sparked one of the strongest national reactions we saw all year. The question, should the minimum age of criminal liability in the Philippines be lowered? In this debate, Attorney John Timothy Ngo and Attorney Luis Voltaire Formeleza laid out two sharply contrasting views, tackling real-world issues like children being used by syndicates, gaps in our justice system, and whether early intervention can stop at-risk youth from being locked into a cycle of crime.
The issue before us is whether the minimum age of criminal liability in the Philippines should be lowered. I stand in support of this proposition, not to punish children, but to protect them, our communities, and the very integrity of our justice system. At present, the minimum age of criminal responsibility is 15 years old. While the intention behind the law is novel, to shield minors from the harshness of the criminal system, it has unfortunately created a loophole that criminal syndicates and unscrupulous adults exploits. Children as young as 10 are being used as instruments to commit theft, drug trafficking, and even violent crimes because the law assures them virtual immunity. Lowering the age of criminal liability does not mean treating children like adult criminals. It means establishing a calibrated, rehabilitated system that holds minor accountable in an age-appropriate way, while we also ensure the reintegration into society. The goal is not punishment, it is intervention. Early and proper intervention is often the only chance to steer at-risk youth away from lifetime of crime. Moreover, science and global practice support reform. Studies shows that children aged 12 and above can already distinguish right from wrong and understand the consequences of their actions. Many countries, including developed ones, have lower threshold than ours, coupled with strong diversion program. To protect our youth, we must not shelter them from accountability. We must guide them through it. Thank you.
We believe in the opposition that the increased criminality among our Filipino youth is brought about by a lot of societal ills that we think should be addressed directly in order for us to have a more holistic approach in addressing the problems. Some of these social ills include poverty, lack of access to social welfare, lack of access to education, lack of access to proper parental care, and a lot more. So we believe that in order for us to have a more holistic approach with respect to this problem, and Mai Pañero already mentioned that the goal is always protection, addressing loopholes. All of these things can be addressed and should be addressed, right? But ensuring as well the holistic approach to the problem by at all times shielding children children in conflict with the law with the harsh realities that can be brought about by the criminal justice system that we currently have.
Okay.
Under Philippine law, particularly the revised Penal Code and the Juvenile Justice and Welfare Act, or commonly known as RA 9344, the age of criminal liability is currently set at 15 years of age. However, the same law also acknowledged that age 15 and above, but below 18, can be held criminally liable if they acted with discernment. A recognition the ability to distinguish from right or wrong exists well before adulthood. Psychological and developmental studies support this. Research shows that children around age 12 and above develop already social moral cognition to understand the consequences of their action. They may yet not be fully matured. However, they are capable of knowing when an act such as theft, assault, or even drug dealing is illegal or harmful. Even RA 9344 itself requires an assessment of discernment in children aged 15 to 18. This means the law already accepts that children younger than 18 can be responsible for their action, suggesting that the line at 15 may not be a fixed or fully rational threshold.
The mere fact that there is a debate as to whether or not children or those who are in conflict with the law can discern the acts or the consequences of the acts and omissions that have been done gives us the reality that we must be erring on the side of caution. The mere fact that there is a debate whether the age of discernment should be pegged at 15, 12, 9, etc. So the question in itself, right, puts us in a position to be more cautious in lowering the age of criminal responsibility. So, I mean, very simple point. I would agree. There might be instances wherein we can argue that children could act with discernment, but it's not always the case. There are a lot of instances wherein we can always argue that children or those who have committed crimes need to be subject to a lot of things in order for us to determine their criminal liability. Because if that's going to be the argument, then altogether might as well maybe perhaps increase the age, reconsider the age of emancipation, or maybe extend more rights or privileges to our younger Filipino citizens if the argument is at that age or at that point in time, they are actually capable of discerning the consequences of their acts.
Okay.
Well, there's science to prove that the optimal growth of the human brain that would enable a man to discern his acts only happens when you reach the age of 21. So there's a study, right? But given the fact that the optimal age is 21, there are a lot of things that can happen in between the ages of 9 to 17. So at that critical point when the psychology of the child is still malleable, we think that it is better that we position ourselves in a position of care and caution insofar as giving treatment to these individuals who might have been in transgression with the law.
The framework of the brain of a child, there's already a research done by W. Andrew Wolf that is uploaded in the website of the National Library of Medicine in the U.S. That says that psychological development studies support that the children around age of 12 and above develop sufficient moral cognition to understand the consequences of their action. We was also consider the history of the age of criminal liability. We must remember also that the revised penal code was enacted in 1932. As provided in Article 12, the age for exempting circumstances is the age of 9. However, during the 1989 United Nations Convention for Children, which the Philippines is also a signatory, then it take full effect. They merely suggested a minimal age of 12, but they encouraged to increase the age of criminal responsibility depending on the situation of the country, the location, and the other multi-sectoral factors.
But are we all in agreement that when it comes to international law, we are compliant by having 15, but actually we've gone overboard by taking that recommendation because other countries, Attorney Ngo, are usually what age?
For Singapore, it's 10. For United Kingdoms, it's 10 to 12. 10 for Scotland, and the other 3 kingdoms such as England, London, and the other kingdom is 12. For South Korea, 14. For US, 11.
Yes.
Actually,
It depends on the state. 12 to 14, it depends actually.
the global average is the median is 12 globally, according to Children Rights International Network. But the average is actually 11 years and 3 months.
But the debate about that, the age limits, is still an evolving thing. No?
Yes, it
Ongoing
is.
pa rin.
Yes.
Kumbaga hanggang ngayon, talagang pinag-uusapan pa kung ano talaga dapat ang magiging age, no? Yung minor na talagang that will be considered as a minor criminal and should be given not such a punitive penalty but more towards rehabilitation.
Okay, so my Panyero already mentioned, and it's quite common knowledge that we are a signatory to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, right? And to substantiate his argument on our treaty, our obligation before the international community vis-a-vis that convention, he mentioned that other countries, looking at their setup, actually allows for the lowering of the age of criminal responsibility. But I don't think it's an apples-to-apples comparison. Looking at the kind of justice system that is prevalent in our country vis-a-vis the development of the legal landscape, the countries that he mentioned, Singapore, South Korea, I think there are still a lot of things to be desired insofar as the Philippine legal system is concerned. So unless we holistically address the loopholes that he openly conceded a while ago that needs to be addressed, once again, my battle cry, we err on the side of caution and we have to be holistic in so far as lowering the age of criminal responsibility is concerned.
Lowering the minimum age of criminal liability in the Philippines, if done with strong safeguards, can still align with international standards and child rights principle. It is not a question of age alone, but a building system that provides early intervention, accountability, and meaningful rehabilitation. The goal is not to punish the children, but to rescue them from cycles of exploitation and criminality before it's too late.
To close my argument, I'd like to take from what our former president mentioned, Ramon Magsaysay, those who have less in life should have more in law. May Panyero emphasized the need for safeguards in order for us to successfully rehabilitate children while not compromising the punitive effects, because after all, we need to make sure that those who have committed crime should be made accountable for the acts that they have perpetrated. But just the same, unless and until we have a holistic approach and we recognize that there are a lot of loopholes in our criminal justice system, and we fix those systems, including the social ills that I mentioned earlier, poverty, lack of access to basic social welfare, parental care, even education. I'd rather that we err on the side of caution and still protect the welfare of the child by not lowering the age of criminal responsibility.
Okay.
Well, partner, no? That's another, definitely one of the heated debates as well.
Yeah. Well, for me, partner, I worked kasi before with, as a pro bono lawyer for a nonprofit that helped children in prisons.
Yes.
And nakita ko talaga yung mga tinatawag nating children in conflict with the law.
Yes.
That time yun yung tawag sa kanila, CICL. And I would visit yung clients that we would handle in prison. Kawawa naman talaga.
Yeah.
Una, nasa batas natin, dapat hiwalay yung
Correct.
detention facility nila. Pero At that time, hinahalo lang sila with adult offenders. So, yung potential for abuse is very high. In fact, yung mga bata na tinutulungan ko that time, hindi sila nakakatulog sa kama. Minsan daw natutulog sila nakatayo kasi pagka-congested yung prisons. Because bata sila, nabubuli sila, mababa sila sa hierarchy.
Yes.
So kahit sa sahig, hindi sila makahiga.
Correct.
Talagang kawawa rin naman, maawa ka doon sa conditions nila.
Tama ka, partner. And aside sa kawawa nga sila, kasi nga nabubuli sila and all that, isa pang dapat natin talaga tignan is that if you expose the young to hardened criminals, baka lalo na silang maging kriminal.
Yeah, that's true.
Diba?
That's a valid concern.
Diba?
Yes.
Ma-absorb nila, sabi nila, ito yung magiging parang elders nila eh. So there'll be perhaps learning to engage in more criminal activities when they get out because they are now exposed to a group of criminals and some of them organized crime and instead of being reformed, lalo pang lumala. Kaya nga talaga siguro, young offenders as defined by law should be given a separate type of treatment. Meron namang argument kasi na naman sa kabila, partner, di ba? Sinasabi nila, hindi, pag naging masyado tayong lenient, kasi what is exactly young? No? Kasi ngayon, sinasabi nila, yung 15-year-old it's because of the internet, because of education, because of social media. They're actually very educated already. They know already what is good and bad. They know the intricacies of the law in a certain extent. Minsan, pag may ginawa sila, alam nilang masama, at yet ginawa pa rin nila. So dapat they should be held responsible. Kaya nga sinasabi ng iba, di ba, sa United States, should he be tried like an adult or not? No? So medyo ano pa rin yan. Kaya nga maganda na may programa tayong abogado kasi napag-uusapan yung mga issues na ganito.
If these debates showed us anything, it's that the law is not just a set of rules. It's a living reflection of our hopes, our fears, and the society we are trying to build.
We heard arguments that challenge convention, expose uncomfortable truths, and reminded us that issues like marriage, crime, speech, aid, and direct democracy are not abstract. They affect real people every single day.
And whether you agreed or disagreed with our guests, one thing is certain: national conversations like these push our legal system forward. They keep our leaders accountable and empower every citizen to think critically about the world they live in.
You know, partner, I guess this is a good way to end the season, highlighting the great debates that we had before we take a short break and go back next year. No? So my partner and I would like to greet you all a very Merry Christmas and a prosperous year ahead.
To you and your families from Abogado. This is Abogado. Good night.
Good night.